A young black man takes an interest in a rich old woman for money, but she's discovered his plan. Hello, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. The fall sun cast a golden glow over the busy streets of Boston, Massachusetts. Leaves in shades of red and orange danced in the air, creating a picturesque scene that contrasted with the hustle and bustle of the city. In the midst of this scene, Darius Williams, a young man of 25, walked hurriedly down Newbury Street, his hands clutching tightly to the strap of his worn-out backpack. Darius was a tall, slender black man with piercing brown eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of struggles. His face, although young, already showed worry lines that didn't match his age. Wearing faded jeans and a worn flannel shirt, he stood out among the well-dressed shoppers in the designer stores that lined the street. As he hurried to his second job as a waiter in a chic restaurant in the Back Bay, Darius couldn't help but notice the glittering windows of the luxury boutiques. His eyes momentarily landed on a pair of Italian leather shoes that cost more than he earned in a month. Sighing, he looked away and continued on his way, his thoughts turning to his overdue bills and the rent he could barely afford. It was in this moment of distraction that Darius collided with someone, almost losing his balance. "Oh, I'm sorry," he exclaimed, recovering quickly. His eyes widened as he realized who he had bumped into. Standing in front of him was Eleanor Blackwell, a 68-year-old woman whose presence exuded elegance and sophistication. Her gray hair was impeccably groomed, and her Chanel outfit looked like it had come straight out of a fashion show. Despite her advanced age, Eleanor had a vitality that rivaled that of people decades younger. "Don't worry, darling," Eleanor replied with a warm smile, her blue eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Accidents happen." Darius was momentarily speechless, impressed not only by Eleanor's appearance, but also by her unexpected kindness. "I'm really sorry, ma'am. I should have paid more attention." Eleanor laughed softly. "Please call me Eleanor. And you are?" "Darius," he replied, hesitantly extending his hand. "Darius Williams." Eleanor shook his hand with surprising firmness. "Delighted to meet you, Darius. You seem to be in a hurry. May I ask where you're going?" Darius hesitated for a moment, aware of the disparity between them. I'm going to work. I'm a waiter at Ristorante Italiano." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "Oh, I love that place. The food is divine. You know, I was thinking of having dinner there tonight. Maybe I'll see you there?" Darius nodded, a little confused by the direction of the conversation. "Yes, ma'am. Eleanor. You'll be there." "Excellent." Eleanor smiled, fixing her Hermes bag. "Well, I won't keep you any longer. It was a pleasure to meet you, Darius." As Eleanor walked away, Darius stood still for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. There was something about her that intrigued him, a mixture of grace and strength that he rarely encountered. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Darius resumed his journey to work. When he arrived at the restaurant, he quickly changed into his impeccable uniform, which contrasted sharply with his worn-out clothes. The evening went on as usual, with Darius skillfully navigating between tables, serving elaborate dishes and expensive wines to wealthy customers. However, his thoughts kept returning to his unexpected encounter with Eleanor. About 2 hours into his shift, Darius saw Eleanor enter the restaurant. She looked even more stunning than before, wearing an evening dress that accentuated her elegant figure. To his surprise, she was alone. The maitre d' led Eleanor to a table in his section, and Darius felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as he approached to serve her. "Good evening, Eleanor," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone. "It's good to see you again." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with recognition. "Darius, what a pleasant surprise. I'm glad I got your section." As Darius attended to her, he couldn't help but notice how Eleanor treated him with a kindness and respect that many other customers didn't show. She asked questions about his life, showing a genuine interest that took him by surprise. As the evening progressed, Darius found himself more and more intrigued by Eleanor. She was not only rich and sophisticated, but also compassionate and perceptive. In their brief moments of conversation, she demonstrated an understanding of the world that went far beyond her privileged appearance. As the restaurant began to empty and Eleanor prepared to leave, she called Darius to her table one last time. "Darius," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'd like to make you an offer. I'm looking for a personal assistant, someone to help me with various tasks. Would you be interested in interviewing for the position?" Darius was stunned. I don't know what to say, Eleanor. That's very generous of you." Eleanor smiled. "Think about it. Here's my card. If you're interested, give me a call tomorrow." As Eleanor left the restaurant, Darius stood still, holding the business card as if it were a talisman. He knew that this could be the opportunity he had always hoped for, a chance to change his life. But at the same time, a voice in his head warned him about the dangers of getting involved with someone from a world so different from his own. That night, lying in his small Roxbury apartment, Darius stared at the ceiling, his mind full of possibilities and doubts. Meeting Eleanor had opened a door he had never imagined existed. Now the question was, would he have the courage to walk through it? With the distant sound of Boston's night traffic in the background, Darius closed his eyes, knowing that the decision he made in the morning could change the course of his life forever. The sun had barely risen when Darius woke up, his eyes fixed on Eleanor Blackwell's business card, which rested on the bedside table. The small rectangle of paper seemed to weigh a ton in his hand as he picked it up, turning it between his fingers. After a restless night's sleep, filled with confusing dreams about wealth and opportunities, Darius finally made his decision. With trembling hands, he dialed the number. After 3 rings, Eleanor's soft, confident voice filled the line. "Hello, Eleanor Blackwell speaking." "Mrs. Blackwell." "Eleanor," Darius stammered, clearing his throat. "It's Darius, from the restaurant. I'd like to accept your offer for an interview." "Excellent, Darius." Eleanor's voice conveyed genuine enthusiasm. "How about we meet this afternoon at the Copley Plaza Hotel? Say 2 p.m.? Darius agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension bubbling up in his stomach. After hanging up, he spent the whole morning getting ready, carefully choosing his best clothes, a starched white shirt and black pants that he saved for special occasions. When he arrived at the luxurious hotel, Darius immediately felt out of place. The gleaming marble of the lobby and the crystal chandeliers seemed to scream his inadequacy. He spotted Eleanor sitting in a velvet armchair in the lobby, looking perfectly at ease in her surroundings. "Darius, darling," Eleanor greeted him warmly, standing up to shake his hand. "You look very elegant. Let's go to the terrace. We can talk better there." As they made their way to the terrace, Darius couldn't help but notice the curious looks they were receiving. A young black man accompanying a visibly wealthy white woman. He swallowed, trying to ignore the discomfort. Once they were settled at a private table overlooking Copley Square, Eleanor ordered tea for them both. "So, Darius," she began, her piercing blue eyes fixed on him, "tell me about yourself. What brings you to Boston?" Darius hesitated for a moment before answering. "Well, I came to Boston to study at UMass, but things got complicated. I had to drop out of college to help my family. Since then, I've been working 2 jobs to support myself." Eleanor listened intently, her eyes never leaving his. "That must have been very difficult for you." "I admire your dedication to your family." She paused, taking a sip of tea. "Darius, I'll be blunt. I'm looking for someone who can be more than just an assistant. I need someone I can trust, someone who can accompany me to social events, on trips, and help me manage my business." Darius felt his heart racing. The offer was tempting but also intimidating. I have no experience with any of this, Eleanor." Eleanor smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Experience can be acquired, Darius. What interests me is your character, your intelligence. I saw something special in you last night." As the conversation progressed, Darius realized that he was being subtly tested. Eleanor asked seemingly casual questions about politics, art, literature, topics he knew only superficially, but in which she was clearly well versed. He struggled to maintain his composure, aware that each answer could influence his decision. "Darius," Eleanor finally said, leaning forward, "I'm willing to offer you a unique opportunity, a generous salary, housing, and the chance to complete your studies. In return, I expect your absolute loyalty and discretion. Would you be willing?" The proposal hung in the air between them, laden with promises and unspoken expectations. Darius felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. Accepting would mean entering a completely new world, leaving behind the life he knew. Refusing would mean returning to the daily struggle for survival. I accept," Darius finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's smile widened, a mixture of satisfaction and something else that Darius couldn't decipher. "Excellent. We'll start right away. First, we need to take care of your closet. I can't have my assistant looking... Well, you understand." The next few hours passed in a blur of designer stores and exclusive tailors. Eleanor picked out piece after piece, dressing Darius as if he were a life-size doll. He found himself wearing suits that cost more than his annual rent, handmade Italian shoes, Swiss watches that seemed to weigh a ton on his wrist. As the day progressed, Darius began to sense a subtle change in the dynamic between them. Eleanor, although always gentle, was becoming increasingly assertive, deciding every aspect of his appearance and behavior. "Straighten up, darling," she murmured, as they walked out of a Newbury Street store. "Remember, you're not a waiter anymore. You're my personal assistant now. You need to exude confidence." Darius obeyed instinctively, feeling simultaneously empowered and diminished. He was grateful for the opportunity, but a small voice in his mind questioned the price he was paying. At the end of the day, Eleanor took him to his new home, a luxurious apartment on Beacon Hill, not far from her own mansion. "This will be your new address," she explained, handing him the keys. "I expect you to be here tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp. We have a lot of work to do." Alone in the opulent apartment, Darius found himself in front of a closet full of expensive clothes and a breathtaking view of the Charles River. He should have been ecstatic, but a feeling of unease consumed him. Looking in the mirror, Darius barely recognized the man staring back at him. Dressed in an Armani suit, with a Rolex on his wrist, he looked the picture of success. But inside, he felt more lost than ever. As night fell over Boston, Darius lay awake, gazing at the city below. He had entered a new world, a world of wealth and privilege that he had always dreamed of. But as the reality of his new position set in, he couldn't help wondering, at what cost? The clock struck midnight when Darius finally lay down on the king-size bed, far too luxurious for his comfort. Tomorrow would be the first day of his new life, a life that promised opportunities beyond his wildest dreams, but also challenges he was barely beginning to understand. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, Darius fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of golden labyrinths and enigmatic smiles. The game of power had begun, and he was only just beginning to learn the rules. The autumn sun bathed Boston Common in golden hues as Darius and Eleanor walked side by side along the tree-lined path. It had been 3 months since Darius had taken on the role of Eleanor's personal assistant, and his life had transformed in ways he could hardly believe. Dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, Darius carried a leather briefcase, while Eleanor, radiant in a cream Chanel ensemble, chatted animatedly about the plans for the next charity event she was organizing. At first glance, they seemed an unlikely pair. He, a young black man of 25, and she, a 68-year-old white socialite. But there was an intimacy in their interaction that went beyond the employer-employee relationship. "Darius, darling," Eleanor said, pausing to adjust the scarf around her neck, "do you remember confirming the governor's presence for the gala dinner?" Darius nodded readily. "Yes, Eleanor. I spoke to his aide this morning. He confirmed his attendance and asked for a vegetarian menu." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with approval. "Excellent work, as always." As they resumed their walk, Darius couldn't help but notice the curious and sometimes disapproving looks they received from other park-goers. A middle-aged couple watched them with frowning expressions, whispering among themselves. A group of young executives cast disdainful glances in their direction. Darius felt his stomach contract. Although he was used to the attention they attracted, it was still difficult to ignore the silent judgment in the eyes of others. Eleanor, sensing his tension, gently put her hand on his arm. "Don't worry about them, Darius. They don't understand our relationship." Darius forced a smile, but Eleanor's words only served to remind him of the complexity of his situation. What exactly was their relationship? Over the last few months, the lines between employer and employee, mentor and protégé, and something deeper had become increasingly blurred. As they continued their walk, Darius reflected on the changes in his life. He now lived in a luxurious apartment, wore designer clothes, and frequented Boston's most exclusive circles. But with these privileges came new challenges and expectations. "Oh, look, it's Mrs. Cabot," Eleanor suddenly exclaimed, waving to an elegant woman who was approaching. "Beatrice, dear, what a pleasure to see you." Beatrice Cabot, a prominent figure in Boston high society, approached with a forced smile. Her eyes moved quickly from Eleanor to Darius, an expression of curiosity barely disguised on her face. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise," Beatrice replied, her voice sweet, but with a hint of something Darius couldn't identify. "And who is your companion?" Eleanor smiled, apparently oblivious to Beatrice's tone. "This is Darius Williams, my personal assistant. Darius, this is Beatrice Cabot, an old friend." Darius held out his hand, maintaining his professional expression. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Cabot." Beatrice hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand briefly. "Likewise," she replied, although her tone suggested otherwise. The conversation that followed was a carefully choreographed social dance, with Beatrice asking seemingly innocent questions about Darius' work and his relationship with Eleanor. Each question seemed loaded with innuendo, and Darius felt increasingly uncomfortable. "So, Darius," Beatrice asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "how did a young man as talented as you end up working for Eleanor?" When before Darius could answer, Eleanor intervened. "Beatrice, darling, Darius is a rare find. He's helping me modernize my foundation and has been absolutely indispensable." Eleanor's tone was light, but there was an underlying firmness that didn't go unnoticed. Beatrice stepped back slightly, her smile faltering. "Well, it's wonderful that you found someone so dedicated," Beatrice replied, casting one last appraising glance at Darius. "I should go now. It was a pleasure to see you, Eleanor, and to meet you, Mr. Williams." As Beatrice walked away, Darius let out a sigh he didn't know he was holding. Eleanor squeezed his arm gently. "Don't let her bother you, darling. Beatrice has always been a jealous gossip." Darius nodded, but Eleanor's words of comfort did little to ease the weight on his chest. He knew that this was only the beginning. As his presence in Eleanor's life became more prominent, the stares, whispers, and judgments would only increase. Continuing their walk, they came to a bench overlooking the lake. Eleanor sat down, inviting Darius to join her. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the ducks swim peacefully in the water. "Darius," Eleanor began, her voice soft, "I know it hasn't been easy for you. People can be cruel and ignorant." Darius swallowed, struggling to find the right words. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, Eleanor, but sometimes I wonder if... Is it worth it?" Eleanor added, her eyes meeting his. "Darius, in my life, I've learned that happiness rarely comes without a price. The question is, are we willing to pay it?" Eleanor's words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Darius felt a whirlwind of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and something deeper that he wasn't yet ready to name. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I know I don't want to give up." Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Neither do I, darling. Neither do I." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Darius and Eleanor remained seated, side by side. The world around them kept spinning, full of judgments and expectations, but in that moment, on that park bench, they found a moment of peace. Darius knew that the challenges were far from over. There would be more looks, more whispers, more moments of doubt. But as he watched the reflection of the sunset on the waters of the lake, with Eleanor by his side, he felt a twinge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could create something beautiful, something that transcended society's expectations. The road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and prejudices. But at that moment, sitting next to Eleanor on Boston Common, Darius made a silent promise to himself. He would face every challenge head-on, determined to prove that love and connection can exist in the most unexpected forms. As the shadows lengthened and night approached, Darius and Eleanor stood up, ready to face whatever the future held for them. Together. The digital clock on Darius' bedside table read 3:17 in the morning. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his trembling hands clutching a half-empty glass of whiskey. The luxurious apartment on Beacon Hill, which only a few months ago had seemed like a dream come true, now felt like a gilded prison. Darius took another sip of his drink, feeling the amber liquid burn his throat. His eyes wandered around the room, landing on the Armani suit hanging on the closet door, the Rolex watch on the dresser, the Italian shoes lined up perfectly on the floor. All symbols of his new life, a life he had planned meticulously. Flashback to 6 months ago. Darius was sitting in his old Roxbury apartment, surrounded by overdue bills and eviction notices. His phone rang. It was his mother, calling from the hospital where his father was being held. "Darius, dear," his mother's voice trembled. "The insurance, they won't cover your father's treatment. I don't know what we're going to do." That night, desperate and out of options, Darius made a decision that would change the course of his life. He hatched a plan that would take him from poverty to wealth, no matter the cost. Back to the present, Darius stood up, staggering slightly, and walked over to the window. Outside, the lights of Boston flickered, a constant reminder of the world to which he now belonged, or at least pretended to belong. His relationship with Eleanor had progressed rapidly over the last few months. From personal assistant, he had become her constant companion, accompanying her to social events, gala dinners, and even a trip to Europe. The world watched with a mixture of fascination and disapproval as the young black man and the elderly socialite grew closer and closer. Darius closed his eyes, remembering the moment Eleanor kissed him for the first time. It was during a charity ball at the Museum of Fine Arts. They were alone in a corridor, admiring a Monet painting, when Eleanor turned to him, her eyes shining with a mixture of vulnerability and desire. "Darius," she whispered, "you've changed my life in ways I never imagined possible." The kiss that followed was soft, almost hesitant. Darius responded automatically, his body acting on instinct while his mind screamed in protest. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? It was part of the plan. So why did it feel so wrong? In the days that followed, Darius found himself plunged into a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, his plan was working perfectly. Eleanor was completely in love with him, entrusting him not only with her heart, but also with significant aspects of her business and personal life. He was closer than ever to achieving the financial security he so desperately wanted for himself and his family. On the other hand, guilt consumed him. Eleanor was not only a wealthy and influential woman, she was kind, intelligent, and genuinely cared about him. Every gesture of affection, every word of endearment was like a knife in his heart. A soft knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. "Darius, are you awake?" It was Eleanor. Darius quickly hid the glass of whiskey and opened the door. Eleanor was standing there wearing a silk robe, her face marked with concern. "I heard noises. Is everything all right?" Darius forced a smile. "Yeah, I just couldn't sleep." Eleanor entered the room, her eyes scanning Darius' face. "You look upset. What's going on?" For a moment, Darius considered telling her everything, confessing his plan, his lies, his manipulation. But the words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he pulled Eleanor into an embrace, burying his face in her silver hair. "It's nothing," he murmured. "I'm just tired." Eleanor pulled away slightly, holding Darius' face between her hands. "Darius, my love, you know you can tell me anything, don't you?" Darius nodded, feeling more miserable than ever. "I know, Eleanor. I know." As Eleanor guided him back to bed, promising to stay with him until he fell asleep, Darius felt his plan crumbling around him. What had begun as a calculated scheme to improve his life had turned into something much more complicated. Lying there with Eleanor gently stroking his hair, Darius found himself trapped in a labyrinth of his own creation. He had entered this relationship with a clear goal, but now he wasn't sure of anything. The ticking of the clock echoed in the silent room, each second marking the time left before the truth inevitably came out. Darius knew he was walking a tightrope, and the fall would be devastating. As sleep finally overtook him, one last question echoed in his mind. Was it too late to change the course of his story? Or was he destined to watch everything he had built come crashing down, taking not only his dreams, but also Eleanor's heart with it? With these dark thoughts, Darius drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that fate was already in motion, setting the stage for a revelation that would change everything. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the silence of the Blackwell mansion on a Sunday morning. Eleanor, still in her silk robe, answered in a sleepy voice. "Hello?" "Eleanor, darling, it's Beatrice. You need to turn on the television now, Channel 5. Intrigued and a little alarmed by her friend's urgent tone, Eleanor turned on the TV in her room. What she saw made her freeze, the remote control slipping from her hands and falling to the floor with a deafening thud. On the screen, a reporter was standing in front of the building where Darius lived before he met her. Sources confirmed that Darius Williams, the young assistant and alleged boyfriend of socialite Eleanor Blackwell, had an elaborate plan to take financial advantage of the relationship. The next words became a blur as Eleanor watched, horrified, interviews with Darius' former neighbors and co-workers. They all told the same story: how Darius had meticulously planned to get close to Eleanor, how he talked openly about using his charm to hook a rich old lady. "Eleanor, Eleanor, are you still there?" Beatrice's voice sounded distant on the phone that Eleanor still held loosely. I have to go, Beatrice," Eleanor muttered, ending the call without waiting for an answer. For long minutes, Eleanor remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the TV screen as her world collapsed around her. When she finally managed to move, she reached for her cell phone and dialed Darius' number with trembling fingers. The call went straight to voicemail. Eleanor dropped the phone on the bed, feeling suddenly exhausted. She walked over to the window, looking out at the immaculate gardens of her estate. Everything seemed so fake now. The next few hours passed in a blur of missed calls, desperate messages, and finally, Darius' arrival at the mansion. When he entered Eleanor's office, his face was pale, his eyes red and swollen. "Eleanor, I can explain," he began. But Eleanor held up her hand, silencing him. "Is it true?" Her voice was calm, almost cold. "Was it all a plan from the start?" Darius opened his mouth, closed it again, and then, with his shoulders slumped, nodded slowly. "Yes," he whispered. "In the beginning, it was." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of months of lies and manipulation falling on her. When she opened them again, there was a fierce determination in her gaze. "Get out," she said simply. "Get out of my house, out of my life. Now." "Eleanor, please," Darius begged, tears streaming down his face. "Things have changed. I've really fallen in love with you. What started out as a plan has become something real, something beautiful." "Enough!" Eleanor shouted, her composure finally breaking down. "Every word that comes out of your mouth is a lie. How can I believe anything you say?" Darius took a step towards her, but Eleanor stepped back. "Don't you dare come near me," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers. Now get out before I call security." As the door closed behind Darius, Eleanor collapsed into her chair, finally allowing herself to cry. Years of experience in the world of business and high society had not prepared her for such a personal, intimate betrayal. In the days that followed, Eleanor isolated herself from the outside world. She turned off her phone, cancelled all her appointments, and refused to receive visitors, even from Beatrice. The scandal exploded in the media, with tabloids and gossip programs dissecting every detail of her relationship with Darius. It was during this period of isolation that Eleanor began her journey of self-reflection. Sitting in her library, surrounded by the books that had always been her faithful companions, she began to write. Pages and pages of thoughts, feelings and memories flowed from her pen. As she wrote, Eleanor began to notice patterns in her life. How she had always sought external validation, how she had allowed her fear of loneliness to lead her to questionable decisions. Darius' betrayal, as painful as it was a symptom of something deeper. A week after the scandal, Eleanor emerged from her isolation. She called Beatrice, inviting her for tea. "Oh, Eleanor," Beatrice exclaimed when she saw her. "How are you?" Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine smile. Rediscovering myself, Beatrice." Over tea, Eleanor shared with her friend the insights she had gained during her week of reflection. "You know," she said, placing her cup on the table, "for years I thought I needed someone to complete me, but now I realize that I was complete all along. I just couldn't see it." Beatrice watched her friend with a mixture of admiration and concern. "And what do you plan to do now?" "Live, Beatrice," Eleanor replied, her eyes shining with a new determination. "Live on my own terms." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor began to implement changes in her life. She broadened the scope of her charitable foundation, focusing on programs that helped women recover from abusive relationships. She began giving lectures on female empowerment and the importance of emotional self-sufficiency. The scandal, which initially threatened to destroy her reputation, became a platform for Eleanor to share her story of overcoming. Women of all ages and social classes began to seek her out, inspired by her resilience. 6 months after the revelation of Darius' betrayal, Eleanor was standing on a stage in front of a packed audience at a TEDx event. "When I found out the truth," she began, her voice tight, "I thought my world had ended. But what I didn't realize at the time was that that end was actually a new beginning." As she spoke, Eleanor saw attentive faces, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding in understanding. She continued, "Betrayal breaks us. It's true. But it is into our cracks that the light enters. And it is this light that allows us to see who we really are, what we really want. Today, I'm here not as a victim, but as a survivor, as someone who has learned that true love begins with self-love." At the end of her talk, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Eleanor smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced for years. She knew that her journey of healing and self-discovery was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to the future. As she left the stage, Eleanor made a silent promise to herself. She would turn her pain into purpose, her betrayal into triumph. And in the process, perhaps she could help others find strength in their own stories of overcoming. The ballroom at the Country Club of Boston was packed, the buzz of conversation filling the air. It was the first big social gathering since the scandal involving Eleanor Blackwell and Darius Williams had broken, and the tension was palpable. Beatrice Cabot, Eleanor's longtime friend, was standing near the bar, watching the scene with watchful eyes. She noticed the furtive glances, the whispers from behind champagne glasses, and the small groups that formed and broke up like waves on a rough sea. "It's a shame, isn't it?" a voice said next to her. Beatrice turned to see Margaret Winthrop, another prominent figure in Boston society. Eleanor was always so careful. Who would have thought that she would fall for such an obvious scam? Beatrice felt a twinge of irritation. "I don't think it's that simple, Margaret. Eleanor is an intelligent woman. Perhaps there was more to this relationship than we're seeing." Margaret raised a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "Oh, Beatrice, dear, don't be naive. A young black man getting involved with a rich white woman? What else could it be but interest?" Across the hall, Robert Caldwell, a respected lawyer and close friend of the Blackwell family, was having a heated conversation with a group of colleagues. "It's absurd," he exclaimed, his face red with indignation. "Eleanor has dedicated her life to this community. She doesn't deserve to be treated like a fool or a victim. Where is our compassion?" "Compassion?" retorted Charles Emerson, an investment banker. "And where was her compassion when she brought that opportunist into our midst? She put us all at risk. Who knows what kind of information he got about our personal lives and businesses?" The discussion continued, voices rising as more people joined the debate. Eleanor's name was mentioned in almost every conversation, some with sympathy, others with disdain. In a quieter corner of the room, Amanda Peterson, a young socialite who had always admired Eleanor, was sitting alone, distractedly fiddling with her cell phone. She opened Instagram and saw dozens of nasty comments on her latest photo with Eleanor, taken weeks before the scandal. "Delete," she muttered, removing the photo. Amanda felt a wave of guilt immediately after the action. Did she really believe that Eleanor was a bad person now? Or was she just giving in to social pressure? Meanwhile, in the Roxbury neighborhood, a group of Darius' friends were gathered in a small apartment, discussing recent events. "I always knew Dee was up to something," said Marcus, shaking his head. "But this? Man, that's a whole new level of low." Tasha, a childhood friend of Darius, looked more conflicted. "I don't know, guys. Did you see how he talked about her? Maybe at first it was a plan, but what if he really fell in love?" "Oh, come on, Tasha," exclaimed Jamal. "Do you really think a guy like Darius would fall in love with a rich old white woman? That's movie stuff, not real life." The conversation continued, oscillating between condemnation and reluctant understanding. The group of friends, once united, now found themselves divided by Darius' actions. Back at the country club, the party was coming to an end. Beatrice, exhausted from the constant arguing and gossip, decided to leave. When she reached the parking lot, she saw a familiar figure leaning against her car. "Eleanor," she gasped, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor Blackwell smiled sadly. "I thought it was time to face the music, as they say, but I didn't have the courage to go in." Beatrice hugged her friend tightly. "Oh, Eleanor, it's been difficult in there." "I can imagine," Eleanor sighed. "Beatrice, I made a mistake. I trusted the wrong person. But you know what? I'm tired of feeling ashamed. I'm tired of hiding." Beatrice watched her friend with admiration. Despite everything, Eleanor still maintained her dignity. "What are you going to do now?" Beatrice asked. Eleanor looked up at the starry Boston sky. "I'm going to rebuild. Not just my reputation, but my life. And maybe, in the process, I can help other people understand that we are all vulnerable to love and its traps." While the two friends chatted in the parking lot, inside the club, the party continued. Opinions differed, loyalties were tested, and the Boston community was forced to confront its own contradictions and prejudices. Eleanor and Darius' affair had become more than just a scandal. It was a mirror that reflected the complexities of human relationships, hasty judgments, and the fragility of social appearances. In the weeks and months that followed, the story continued to reverberate around the city. Lectures on intergenerational relationships were organized at universities. Support groups for victims of emotional abuse gained more visibility. Debates about race, class, and privilege became more frequent in clubs and associations. Slowly, the community began to realize that Eleanor and Darius' story was more than a case of deception. It was a lesson in empathy, the importance of looking beyond appearances, and the complexity of the human heart. And as the dust began to settle, a question hung in the air. Would we ever be able to judge less and understand more? The answer, like life itself, remained complex and constantly evolving. The auditorium at Harvard University was packed. Students, professors, and members of the community crowded around, eager for the symposium entitled Love, Trust, and Ethics in the 21st Century to begin. On stage, a diverse panel of experts was preparing to discuss the complexities of modern relationships, using the case of Eleanor Blackwell and Darius Williams as a starting point. Dr. Samantha Chen, a renowned psychologist, was the first to speak. "The Blackwell-Williams case," she began, "forces us to question our preconceived notions about love. Can we really say that love is pure and selfless, when so many relationships begin on the basis of physical attraction, social status, or financial security?" A murmur ran through the audience. Many stirred uncomfortably in their seats, confronted with a truth that few wanted to admit. "Consider this," Dr. Chen continued. "How many of us, when choosing a partner, don't take into account factors such as financial stability, professional ambition, or social connections? The case of Eleanor and Darius only makes explicit what we often keep implicit in our own relationships." Next to speak was Professor James Hawthorne, a specialist in ethics. "The central issue here," he argued, "is not whether love can coexist with material interests, but the honesty with which we approach these issues. Darius' mistake was not necessarily being attracted by Eleanor's wealth, but hiding his initial intentions." In the audience, Eleanor Blackwell, sitting discreetly in the back row, listened intently. Every word seemed to echo in her mind, forcing her to reevaluate not only her relationship with Darius, but her entire love life. The debate continued, with differing opinions being expressed by both the panel and the audience. A young student raised her hand. "But how can we trust again after such a deep betrayal?" This question seemed to touch a nerve in everyone present. The silence that followed was broken by Eleanor's soft but firm voice. She stood up, surprising everyone. "If I may," she said, walking towards the stage, "perhaps I can offer a unique perspective on this discussion." A buzz of excitement went through the auditorium. Eleanor took the stage, her presence commanding respect and attention. "Trust," she began, "is like a crystal vase. Once broken, it can be mended, but the cracks will always be there, reminding us of its fragility." She paused, her eyes scanning the audience. "However, I've learned that true strength lies not in never being broken, but in how we choose to rebuild ourselves." Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "My relationship with Darius began with a lie. It's true. But over time, something changed. What began as a calculated plan turned into something real, something profound, and that's the complexity of the love we're discussing today." The audience was mesmerized. Eleanor, the woman everyone thought they knew from the headlines and gossip, was revealing herself in a way no one expected. "Love," she continued, "is not black and white. It's not pure or impure. It's a complex tapestry, woven with threads of desire, companionship, self-interest, and yes, sometimes even deceit. The challenge is not to find perfect, selfless love. That's a myth. The challenge is to navigate these turbulent waters with honesty and compassion." As Eleanor spoke, many in the audience began to reflect on their own relationships. How many had started a romance for reasons that weren't purely altruistic? How many had hidden parts of themselves, fearing the other person's judgment? "What I've learned," Eleanor concluded, "is that true love is not the absence of self-interest or flaws. It's the willingness to be vulnerable, to show our imperfections and still choose to stay. It's the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful, and still choose to love." When Eleanor finished speaking, the auditorium erupted in applause. Tears could be seen in the eyes of many present. What had begun as an academic debate had turned into a profound reflection on the nature of love and trust. In the days and weeks that followed, Eleanor's words echoed through the Boston community and beyond. Discussion groups were formed. Therapists reported an increase in sessions focused on honesty and vulnerability in relationships, and even sex education programs in schools began to incorporate discussions about ethics and emotional consent. The case of Eleanor and Darius, which initially appeared to be just another scandal, had become a catalyst for a wider cultural shift. People began to have more open conversations about their expectations in relationships, about the intersection between love and self-interest, and about the importance of honesty, even when it's difficult. Eleanor, for her part, continued her journey of self-discovery. She began writing a book about her experience, not as a victim, but as someone who had learned valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and self-acceptance. Darius, who had initially disappeared from public life after the scandal, eventually reappeared. He began working with organizations that helped young people in vulnerable situations, using his own story as a warning about the dangers of manipulation and the importance of integrity. As time went on, Eleanor and Daria's story went from being the subject of gossip to becoming a reference point in discussions about ethics, love, and modern relationships. It served as a reminder that love, in all its complexity, remains one of the most powerful and transformative forces in the human experience. And so, in a society that often seeks simple answers to complex questions, the Blackwell-Williams case has stood as a testament to the multifaceted nature of love and an invitation for everyone to look deeper into their own hearts and motivations. Their story is a powerful reminder: love can't be bought. Have you ever stopped to think about the true intentions behind relationships? Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.